And now we're on the top of Daf Lamed Vav Omid Beis. Ela Ema, the correct Gerson, this price should be Bilvad Shelo Yasena Mitsuda. In other words, he should not cover, when he covers this kaveres, make sure, be careful not to cover the windows as well. Because if you cover the windows, then there's no doubt that he's going to be capturing the dvorim in the kaveres. And that would be us. So Gemara says, Pshita. I mean, why would I even entertain that you'd be allowed to cover the dvorim and capture them in the kaveres? You're certainly violating the Isut Seder. And even if he's not miskavin lotzud, he doesn't have kavanah for tzeidah, but nevertheless, it's a psikresha in a case where there are no chalonos. Or alternatively, according to Rabbi Yehuda, all the shade of miskavin is awesome. The Gemara says, you know what the Havamina was? If not for the Bryce Amalditim, I would have said there's no such thing as tzeidah with regard to bees. Not every creature on the face of the earth, not every living creature lends itself and is included in the malach of tzeidah. We need what's called b'mino nitod. But shalo b'mino nitod is not tzeidah. Something which is, by definition, in the nature of the species itself, it is generally taken capture, like a chaya or an oaf. You capture an animal, you capture a bird, a chicken. That's subject to tzeidah. However, shalom b'mino so if you have something which, generally speaking, we don't capture. For example, the Gemara thinks right now, at least in the Havmi, that dvorim, bees, that fly here, there, and elsewhere, we don't usually capture them. So that's called ein b'mino nitzod. In such a case, there's no isur tzeidah. So that would have been the Havamina to allow him to cover the kaveris in a hermetic, seal it up, even if there are no windows. And there's no problem with tzeidah because it's ain't no b'mino nitzod. Kamash malon, nevertheless, the Brisa tells me it's asur. Tzeidah applies even to dvorim. And the question is, why does tzeidah apply to dvorim if we just finished establishing that shalom b'mino nitzod? The Ra'ah, one of the great Sephardic Rishonim, is of the opinion that this Bryce is coming to teach you that dvorim is considered davar shebemino nitzah. Perhaps it's rare, but there are people who capture bees. However, the Magen Avram in Siman Samach Dalid, in Siman Shin Yud Dalid, commenting on the Trumas Hadeshin in Siman Samach Dalid, argues that even if there would be ein b'mino nitza with regard to dvorim, but nevertheless, b'Rabbanan, it's asur. And he argues that even on a D'Rabbanan level, we'll apply the principle of psik reisha. And if we know that he's capturing dvorim because there are no windows, so when he covers it with a mat, he will definitely capture the bees. Then we have to prohibit it, even though in the worst case scenario, it'll only amount to a violation of an Isur D'Rabbanan. Rav Ashi Omar, Rav Ashi wants to go back to the original answer that we gave, that the heter to be metaltal lemachzeles in order to cover the beehives is for the purpose of the dvash, of the honey that he has inside, which is roy. It's omed lachilas adam. You asked me, but what about Yemos HaGshavim during the winter months? There is no, the kaveris is completely devoid of any honey. Mi katani. Let's read the Brisa very carefully. Does it say in the Brisa Yemos HaChama ubi Yemos HaGshavim that during the winter months you're allowed to cover this kaveris? That's not what it says. It says, those are two descriptions of the same period of time, which means the following. So again, the Bryce is not allowing you to be mechasa, the kaveris, during the summer months and during the winter months, but rather, biyome nisa to biyome titre. The subject of this Bryce are those months where there's both sun and rain. Right, the two equinoxes. So you have the Tishrei, the month of Tishrei, Again, here in Eretz Yisrael, usually we get no rain during Tishrei, but sometimes we even get rain during Tishrei. And certainly in Nisan, at the end of the winter season, there are some rainy days. Other days are burning hot. Is therefore B'yomei Nisan or B'yomei Tishrei the Ikacham V'ikach Shanim. There are days of heat and there are days of rains during these 2 months. The Ika Dvash, and therefore there is Dvash. And for the purpose of Dvash, you're allowed to be metaltel with a machzelas to cover the kaveras. The Mishnah says, no simply tachas adelef b'Shabbos, Tana, we learned in the Beitza, im nismale hakli. What happens when the vessel reaches the top? The water seeping down through the crevices and cracks of the roof has now filled up this kli. Is shofech, you're allowed to pour off all this water into the ground as gutter into the gutters. Bishona, and goes back and replaces the kli to receive the dlah. The Edo Nimna. And he doesn't have to feel inhibited about doing so, even if it means that extra tirchi is going to go back and forth with the kli. As soon as it gets filled up, pours it out, comes back again. All that is mutter. Now the Gemara tells us a story that happened to Abaye regarding dlaf. Beirei Chayat Abaye Doluf. The Beis Reichayim, which is the mill of Abaye, was subject to rains that are coming to flood it and ruin it. Because this Reichayim, this millstone, or whatever you call it, the mill, is made of tit of cement, which is very fragile, so to speak. It's very vulnerable and gets ruined by the rains. Now, Abai did not have any kalim accessible to him to catch the delef before it would land on the Beis Reichayim. Also, Lakami the Rabbi runs to his Rebbe Rabba to ask him what to do. Amalei zil aile lefuyach lahasa. Puryach is a bed. Take your bed out of your bedroom and put it into this house, this structure where your mill is. And now, as a result, you have waters that are coming down into your bed. Now, this takes on a whole nother status. And that's called dlaf shel re'i. Dlaf shel re'i, which is a vessel that's full of feces, you're allowed to move wherever you have to get rid of it, so that even though you're moving muktzah, because we want you to be allowed to tolerate and exist in that environment, the afikin. And you're allowed to take it and take it out. Now, the Mefarshim, the commentaries say that the mill itself becomes a graf shel re'i, because if the mill will be absorbed with this rainwater, then it will start smelling up the place and so forth and so on, and it has the status of repulsive graf shel re'i. Now, the word graf literally translates as a kli cheres. It's a piece of earthenware which is used to receive feces. Yosef Abai v'kokashali. Now, this is very interesting. Abai went to his Rebbe Rabbah for a psak. He got a psak, and he questions the psak. It's like, you imagine you bring an esrog to a rav, and he paskins, wow, that's a beautiful, perfect esrog. And then you start questioning him and saying, well, what about this spot and this spot? And here it's indented and so forth and so on. So Abai says, v'chiosin graf shel re'i lechatchila. Again, if the child, peed in the pot, pardon the expressions, and it's a graf shel re'i. But now I have something, my bed, and I'm taking it deliberately out into the millstone to create a situation of graf shel re'i. Am I allowed to do so? Adahachi, in the meantime, before Abai got an answer from his Rebbe Rabbah, nafal bereichayim to Abai. the Rechaim itself collapsed. It fell apart. Omar Abai says, Tasili the Avri Adamar. I deserve this punishment to ruin and lose my mill. Apparently, I didn't have insurance because I violated my Rebbe's psak. I questioned my Rebbe. I once asked Rav Soloveitchik about my wife was an 8th month pregnancy, was Erev Yom Kippur, whether she had to fast. So he said, for sure she has to fast, but if she sees the following symptoms, then she should end her fast immediately and eat. So I said, Rebbe, should we feed her small amounts at a time? He got so angry at me. I still feel guilty today, 40 years later, 45 years later, whatever it is, for questioning his psak. And he says to me, no, she should eat Kishsuda Shlomo HaMelech B'Shaita. Let her eat a full banquet, like Shlomo HaMelech was like Henry VIII. Omar Shmuel Graf Shel Re'i. If you have a kli cheres that's used and designated to be makabel tzoa, the ovid shel mei raglayim, or a kli cheres that's designated for urine, mutalo tzion liashpa. On Shabbos, you're allowed to remove them from your house and throw the contents of this receptacle, all the feces, etc., into the local tzfardea, the local dumping point. Ukshumach zero, and now he's got this graph or this avit, and he wants to bring it back home. It's no simbo mayim. First, he should wash out the kli with water. Hopefully, he has a hose out there. He has access to water. Because as is, it's a dover mo. So we allow you to take it out of the house so that you can tolerate your house. But now, to bring it back in, you got to make sure it's not also betiltul, and it is not repulsive. It's not a dover mo, so you have to wash it out with water. Sover minei, the Talmidim thought that based on this, the ruling of Shmuel, graf shel re'i agav mana in ifnei atzmo lo, that Shmuel apparently assumed with regard to the graf shel re'i that you carried out the kli and you didn't directly handle any of the re'i itself, the rei, and that would have been also. But Toshma, the Gemara says, I have a raya that's not so. Dahuach barta dishtakach. They found a mouse. Bei is parmoke the Rav Ashi. Is parmoke is where they kept the perfumes. So on Shabbos they find a dead mouse in the perfume house of Rav Ashi. Amalahu, Rav Ashi says to his household, Nokta b'tzutzise v'afkua. Hold on to its tail and throw it out. So we see clearly that in the case of a graf shel re'i, you're allowed to actually move the re'i itself, that which is mos, directly. The Mishnah says, Kol shechayovin olav mishum shvus, or mishum rishus, or mishum mitzvah, b'Shabbos, chayovin olav b'Yom Tov. And the Mishnah has 3 categories. We'll study these 3 categories, but what's common to all these 3 categories, which are formulated as rabbinic prohibitions on Shabbos, apply equally to Yom. First, you have a category between Shavuos, which means that you're involved in some sort of activity which has no mitzvah element whatsoever. And we'll see examples as we go along. Number 2, Mishum Rishus. Rishus means that it is a mitzvah, but it's a bit of a voluntary mitzvah. It's not an absolute 100% mitzvah, but there is an element of mitzvah. And finally, Mishum Mitzvah. There are things that are abundant prohibited on Shabbos, and therefore, ipso facto on Yom Tov, which are mitzvah. And yet, the Rabbanan said, we have a shvus, we're afraid of a malacha, we're not going to allow. V'eluhi. Now, the Mishnah breaks down these categories into their actual contents, the substance. Number 1, let's take it from the top. Mishum shvus. Lo olim be'ilon. You're not allowed to climb a tree. That's a pure shvus. There's no mitzvah involved. Lo rochven al gabe behema. We don't allow you to ride an animal on Shabbos. V'lo shaten al pnei hamayim, and the Gemara is going to discuss why you're not allowed to row your boat and, ride a sailboat on the waters on Shabbos. Lo metafchin. Metafchin means to bang with your hands for musical purposes. Lo mesafkin means to clap and bang the palms of your hand one against the other. V'lo meraktin, and we're not allowed to dance with our feet. All these, as we'll soon see, are done for the sake of simcha, of song, maybe have a nice kalbach niggin, but it's prohibited midrabanan because we're afraid zera shema yitaken kli shir. And we'll see how that applies today when there really is no chashash of shema yitaken kli. So let's go to the second category where it's not a full-fledged absolute mitzvah, but there's an element of mitzvah involved. That's called rishus. Lo danin. We don't judge cases and issue verdicts and rulings of a court on Shabbos, and for that matter on Yom. Lo danin. Not only don't we judge, but lo makadshemi, so we don't even allow you to marry a woman on Shabbos. And certainly there's an element of a mitzvah in marrying a woman on Shabbos. V'lo choltzim v'lo miyabim, chalitza and yibum are both mitzvos, and yet it's prohibited on Shabbos and Yom. Elim tru mitzvah, lo makdishim, we're not allowed to be makdish hegdesh, lo marichin, we're not allowed to say erki olai or erkecha alecha, or erkecha olai. And v'lo machrimim, when you say arei behem zu cherem, that's also prohibited. V'lo magdiim truma umas. And we're not allowed to be mafresh truma mas. Kol elu b'yontif amru v'kavachon b'Shabbos. These apply to yontif, and how much more so to Shabbos. And the Mishnah makes a klal at the end of the Mishnah, ein bein yontif l'Shabbos elo chol nefesh bilvad. The only distinction between yontif and Shabbos is that on yontif will be matir moleches chol nefesh. The Gemara analyzes lo olin be'ilan. Why? Shema yitlosh. We're afraid that if he climbs a tree, he may inadvertently, without paying attention, grab a hold of one of the branches or one of the fruits and pull him off. And that is a violation of Meleches Ktsira, which is also been on Torah. Lo rochon al gabi behem. But the Gemara initially thinks, Kzera shema yetzei chutz l'tchum. Maybe he won't pay attention. He's riding a fast horse, and he ends up beyond 2,000 amma, beyond the outer boundaries of the city. So now the Gemara gets into a whole issue here. We have Machlokas, Rabbi Akiva, and the Chachamim, where the Tchumen is Doraisa or not. Rabbi Akiva insists that the Isa Tchumen is Doraisa, and we derive from Apostle Yetzei Ish Promo. The Chacham disagree. The whole institution of Tchum is all D'Rabbanan. Now, we are making a Gzera, according to the Gemara's initial understanding, prohibiting riding an animal because he might go chutz l'tchum. So what if he goes chutz l'tchum? According to the Chachamim, if you go chutz l'tchum, you've only violated an Issa D'Rabbanan. Now you're going to make a Gzera or to a D'Rabbanan. That's a Gzera l'Gzera. Shmami, no, we have no conclusion available except for one. At Tchumen are D'Oraisa. And we must accept the Shita Rabbi Akiva in the light of this Mishnah, that the reason why you're not allowed to ride an animal is because you might violate the Doraisa of Chutz L'Tchum. So the Gemara now says, no. We want to reconcile this Mishnah even with the Chachamim who disagreed and rejected Rabbi Akiva. They hold Tchumen is D'Rabbanan. Ella, so you'll ask me, why did we prohibit riding a horse on Shabbos on Yom Tov? Because again, just like in the case of climbing a tree, if you're riding an animal, you might go underneath the tree, and you might inadvertently pull off a branch of the tree and violate the malach of Ktsir. Well, shatan al pnei hamayim. Why don't we allow you to take a raft and so to speak, go onto the, raft onto the river. In those days, back in the time when they created when they wanted to prepare for sailing, they would make a kli, which was made of reeds, and they would weave it together and make a kind of a long barrel out of it almost. And it was open on one side. And that's how they learned how to sail. And then you'd be chayiv for makav patish for creating a kli. Lo metafkin, lo mesafkin, lo meraktim, gzeira shem yisaken klishir. And here we have a long machlokas here about Bizman Hazeh. Tosfos already is aware of it. We are mekil, and we allow dancing and singing. The Mishnah Berurah says you're only allowed these kinds of dances on Simchas Torah, but not on any other holiday or Shabbos. And the Ramah says halach of a morin kain, meaning that even though Bizman Hazeh, we're not afraid of klishir, therefore technically you'd be allowed to dance and sing and clap and all the rest on Shabbos and Yom Tov, but we're not going to teach the people to do that because there is a shita that even Bizman Hazeh, once the Gzeira was instituted, we don't make any changes based on contemporary sociological. So the Gemara asks about mitzvah ka'avid. Why do you categorize din as a rishus? It really is a full-fledged mitzvah. For him, for this particular judge, it's considered a rishus. Why? Because the case could be adjudicated by a different bezdin, which is adif minei, which is a greater bezdin of scholarship. The Gemara wants to know, why do you tell me that kiddushin, marriage, is only a rishus? It's really a mitzvah. You categorized it as a rishus. Lo tzricha. And the Gemara answers on the top of Lamed Zayin, the Islay Isha Ubadim. He has a wife, he has children, and therefore, even if his wife is no longer giving birth to children, and he wants to get married to have more children, and that's a kiyum of what's called La'erev al Tanach Yodecha, to have more children, nevertheless, it's not a full-fledged mitzvah. A review would not apply. And according to Beit Shammai, it means he has two sons. According to Beit Hillel, he has a son or a daughter, and therefore he's not really chayiv in the mitzvah. So this is where we're going to end here for today on the top of Lamed Zayin, and I'll wish you a Chodesh Tov. Thank you so much.